A historic day for the United States.
President Trump was the only president who could stand up to both our allies and adversaries, saying we must level the playing field.
Hello, my name is Kateryna Soliar, and there will be no usual countdown of time because here, as in a vacuum, only one time is frozen: 24 hours left. But when it comes to peace or a global trade war, let's try to figure out what's happening in the world. Sweden is preparing nuclear bunkers in case of a third world war. 64,000 shelters have been made ready for protection, and 5 million households already have instructions in case of an attack. These bunkers are designed to protect people from explosions, radiation, and chemical weapons. By 2030, Sweden plans to increase military spending to 3.5% of GDP. This will be the largest defense build-up since the Cold War. In Spain, demand for bunker construction has increased by 200% due to the fear of war in Europe. This demand started growing after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and now it is skyrocketing across all indicators. The average cost of a private shelter is approximately €150,000, but this amount doesn't deter people, as some shelters can cost over €350,000, depending on the specific needs and preferences of the owner. Due to the high price, many people are building safe spaces right in their homes. The European Commissioner for Equality has posted a video showing what an emergency kit for war should look like and signed it with "Ready for anything." This is how our European way of life should be. All of this is unfolding against the backdrop of Europe gradually losing trust in the United States' reliability as a partner. And it's not only about Ukraine, or not just Ukraine. After the United States temporarily suspended military aid to us in early March, European allies began to question the dependability of the US and started developing new plans for weapons production within Europe in order to reduce their reliance on America. Currently, Secretary of State Rubio is trying to convince Europeans to resume purchases from the US at the former level, but as the joke goes, the spoons are found, but the taste remains. The issue of arms purchases by Europe from the US will be raised this week at the NATO Defense Ministers Summit in Brussels. Our Foreign Minister Sibia will also attend. The key topics of the negotiations will be strengthening international support for Ukraine, priority military needs, advancing toward a just peace, and future security guarantees. Without them, as you understand, there is no way forward. All of this is happening against the backdrop of contradictory approaches from Trump regarding Ukraine, and not to Russia, but to Europe. First, his administration openly questions the fundamental principles of NATO's Article 5, pushes Europe to significantly increase its defense spending and to reduce its long-standing reliance on the United States, and then attempts to apply pressure on Europe, which has made the decision to refuse to purchase or deploy certain types of American weapons. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio declares that the US is more active in NATO than ever. He also asserts that media reports suggesting the United States might withdraw its forces from Europe are nothing more than baseless hysteria, meant to stir unnecessary panic and confusion. However, this measure, I remind you, was considered a possible concession to Russia to end the war. Another demand from Russia was to stop military aid to Ukraine. Europe clearly responded, no, this will not happen, because Ukraine must be in a position of strength, but the US. The US is thinking. The US is considering how to make concessions to Russia and ensure Ukraine doesn't notice. Because there is no talk yet about the next military aid packages. The previous ones are ending, and the next Ramstein format will take place without America's participation. For the first time, the head of the Pentagon will not attend a multilateral meeting on supporting Ukraine. And this is reported by Defense News, referencing unnamed European officials and US representatives. Nevertheless, Pete Hegseth will not participate in the meeting of the 50 countries coordinating military assistance to Ukraine. This will be the first time the coalition will meet without the US Secretary of Defense. A lot of firsts lately, you know. And for the first time, Dmitriev, the Russian negotiator, is heading to Washington. For the first time, the head of the Pentagon will not be at Ramstein. That is a lot for the first time. The Ramstein meeting will be on April 11th in Brussels, led by Germany and the UK. Hegseth attended the previous meeting in February, although by then he had already become the first Pentagon leader who did not lead this coalition at the meeting.
Hegseth will not join either in person or virtually. Furthermore, the Pentagon is likely not to send any high-ranking representative. The US is still determining the format of its participation in various initiatives to support Ukraine, including security assistance and training.
For European allies, the absence of the Secretary of Defense is yet another indication that the Trump administration is prioritizing less support for arming Ukraine. By the way, Hegseth openly stated that during the meeting in Brussels this past February, he strongly criticized European officials, urging them to take greater responsibility for their own security instead of continuing to depend on America's 75-year-long commitment to defending the continent. He also ruled out the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO, even before the administration made an official decision on the matter. And let me remind you that Hegseth's predecessor, Lloyd Austin, was the one who essentially established the Ukraine Defense Contact Group shortly after Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022, marking a crucial step in international efforts to support Ukraine. The group has coordinated over $126 billion in military aid, with about half from the United States. Over 3 years, the group became synonymous with American leadership and the Ramstein Air Base, where it was founded. The only time Austin was not at this meeting was at the beginning of 2024, when he was undergoing treatment. At that time, he joined the summit remotely, and the meeting was led by another senior Pentagon official. The only exception. So what do we have now? Europe is preparing for war. America doesn't want to help Ukraine with weapons, but still expects weapons to be bought from them, as before. And they are imposing tariffs. On all of them. On all of them except.
Donald Trump started a global trade war. You know, first comes a trade war, then a hybrid war, and then a conventional war. At the very least, the world now has a clearer understanding of what Ukraine experienced back in 2013, which seems like a long time ago, but it was a pivotal moment that left a lasting impact on the country and its people. When restrictions were imposed on Ukraine, followed by an information campaign, and then Russia launched its war. Something similar could very well happen in the world today, as America's allies, who were hit with tariffs ranging from 25% to 40%, are gradually beginning to come together around China. They are starting to say, listen, it's time for us to form joint coalitions and work together to counterbalance these economic pressures. For many of America's friends, like South Korea, Japan, India, and the European Union, who were part of the partner pool and supported the US in its fight against China, the newly imposed tariffs are now unclear.
These tariffs, as I already mentioned, have been imposed on everyone except Russia, Belarus, Cuba, and North Korea. Trump's team claims it's due to no direct trade, but it appears to be about who's in power.
Communication is important. Consider North Korea's nuclear weapons. The leader of North Korea is a smart person. We've built very good relations.
Trump called this period the golden age of America that is returning, while an economist referred to this day as the day of America's ruin. So what is this, really?
Absolutely all economists are saying the same thing. This is a blow to the American economy, a blow to the American consumer, and super risks for the US economy. Absolutely everyone. This is a consensus. At this moment, they are essentially shooting themselves in both feet, as they are directly harming the American consumer, who is bearing the brunt of these economic actions and facing rising costs. They're pushing the US economy toward recession, while stock markets are heading into a deep decline, thus provoking a global financial crisis. Of course, it's impossible not to respond to this, but I think the European Union will try to respond strategically, without harming its own economy. Because any tariffs, any duties, any protectionism always hurt the economy, especially the country that imposes those tariffs. And the European Union, in advance, is not interested in shooting itself in the foot, but it could strategically target certain areas that are important, including for Trump, to push him to reverse this. I'm talking about the IT sector, for example, and Tesla, which is practically begging for big tariffs to be imposed on it. even though its sales are already half of what they used to be.
Late last night, Trump imposed large-scale tariffs on imported goods and declared a state of emergency to protect the U.S. economy. A 10% tariff has been introduced on virtually all goods imported into the U.S. For some countries, the tariffs are even higher, including a 34% tariff on China and a 20% tariff on the European Union. The share of imports to the U.S. from Canada, China and Mexico accounts for 42% of all goods entering the United States. This includes over $200 billion in cars, over $150 billion in crude oil, $200 billion in phones and computers, and over $85 billion in auto parts are affected, significantly impacting multiple industries. Naturally, those targeted by these sanctions have already announced that they will impose similar restrictions, which means that the new tariffs will cost the typical U.S. household about $2,600. The price of cars in the U.S. could rise by $12,000. Stocks of major U.S. companies immediately dropped by 2%. And this is just the reaction from the first day. Meanwhile, the Treasury Secretary has already called on countries to take a deep breath and not take immediate action in response to Trump's new tariffs.
We are a country with a trade deficit. A country with a deficit has an advantage. They are countries with a surplus. Countries with a surplus typically lose in trade escalations.
He also calls for waiting and seeing where this will lead. Because if retaliatory measures are taken, it will lead to the escalation of the trade war, in which, according to him, the U.S. will of course have the advantage. In an attempt to reassure former allies, who have now become trade adversaries, he suggested that the tariffs might be temporary, offering a glimmer of hope that the situation could eventually be resolved. He believes the Trump administration will wait, assess, and cancel if needed. Earlier, the European Union, China, Japan, South Korea, Colombia, and Mexico announced that they would respond to Trump's trade actions, and the head of the European Parliament's Committee on International Trade called the new U.S. tariffs unjustified, illegal, and inappropriate. The U.S. tariffs will also affect Ukraine, and our goods will face 10% tariffs. Economy Minister Yulia Sviridenko says it will be difficult, but she insists it won't be critical.
What do the new tariffs from the United States mean for Ukraine? It's difficult, but not critical. A general 10% tariff will apply to us. There are no specific higher tariffs imposed on Ukraine, unlike those applied to Moldova, which faces a 31% tariff, or the European Union, which has a 20% tariff. In 2024, Ukraine exported a total of $874 million worth of goods to the United States, with $363 million of that total consisting of pig iron, while an additional $112 million came from the export of pipes. These exports play a crucial role in strengthening the economic ties between Ukraine and the US while highlighting Ukraine's contribution to global markets. In contrast, we purchased $3.4 billion worth of goods from the US.
Ukrainian tariffs on American goods are quite low, 10% on cars, and 0% on coal and oil.
So, we now have a chance to negotiate better terms. The US statement clearly mentions this possibility. If everything stays as it is, the US universal tariff will mainly affect small manufacturers. That's why we are already working on securing better terms for Ukraine.
We export to the US over 600 different categories of goods. Very diverse, and they even say we send them wrenches. Of these, 65 types of products exceed $1 million in value. Ukraine has a lot to offer the United States and is a reliable partner and ally. Yulia Sviridenko states that fair tariffs would benefit both countries, and as a result, these discussions will continue. But if we take a closer look at our current reality, how exactly will these tariffs truly impact us in the long run?
If you went to Walmart in the United States, you might see the theoretical consequences. In Ukrainian stores, it's practically impossible. This affects American consumers, not Ukrainian consumers. So it can't affect Ukrainians. It could impact Ukrainian businesses if the US were an important trading partner for us. But the US is not a major trading partner for us. We trade very little because they are just too far away. As Trump likes to say, there's a big ocean between us. Because of this ocean, we supply very little to them. The only business that comes to mind is Interpipe. They often sell steel products in the US. But if we recall Trump's first presidency, when he imposed a 25% tariff on Interpipe's products, it led to Interpipe selling their products to the US for 25% more a few months later. So, it's unlikely that we should expect anything different this time. However, this still has a rather limited effect. We won't notice a direct effect on the Ukrainian economy. As for the Ukrainian hryvnia exchange rate against the dollar, there will be no changes. It will remain stable. Nothing will happen here. Because the exchange rate is effectively fixed due to the war. But in the world right now, there are such fluctuations that it's hard to even predict. Everyone quickly flocked to the dollar, seeing it as a safe haven, primarily trusting in the stability of the United States, but now, it has become one of the most unpredictable and volatile markets. Amid discussions about Trump's other plans for the dollar and US debt, this certainly isn't encouraging anyone to buy dollars. Today, for example, the dollar dropped significantly. The euro-dollar rate was 1.11. Remember, we were recently talking about almost parity at 1-to-1, and now it's already 1.11. So, the dollar is unpredictable right now. Buying it is definitely not advisable. If you're concerned about the hryvnia, buy euros instead. It's a better choice.
And of course, the logical question arises, should Ukraine impose similar tariffs in response?
Discussing this is pointless because, given the need for US support in negotiations, we cannot impose everything on it. Ukraine won't be imposing anything. Even if it were worth doing, we would still understand that we wouldn't impose anything.
If we talk about incidents, which were also indispensable, then we and those led by Trump will also affect the Fjord and McDonald's Islands. These islands have a population of 0. People don't live on Fjord Island, but tourists and scientific expeditions visit occasionally. As for McDonald's Island, nothing. There were only 2 landings, one in 1971 and another in 1980. The islands are primarily home to penguins, seals and seabirds. Though the islands have their own domain and internet site. Legally, these are not even separate states, since they have been under the jurisdiction of Australia for many years, but everyone, even penguins, must pay tariffs. And all of this might seem somewhat amusing at first glance, but perhaps it wouldn't be quite as funny if the situation weren't so deeply sad and concerning.
Beyond the jokes and laughter, we are truly confronting a new reality, one that requires us to adapt and reassess how we navigate the challenges ahead. Plus, the US is also facing a new reality. The allies they invested in, the allies they nurtured, like Vietnam, India, South Korea, these are the countries around China that they've funneled money into to help them grow, while China weakened. The policy was like this. Weaken China not through aggression but through money transfers. These countries are growing, entering the US market, and earning money. However, it's important to note that, once again, the majority of the companies operating in these markets are American, dominating the economic landscape. For example, the iPhone, which was manufactured in India, moved from China to India with a 25% increase. How will Americans now be able to get their favorite phones from India if, under Trump's policies, India is now considered an enemy? This raises important questions about the future of trade and the accessibility of products that many rely on. How will trade work now?
There is another point that I didn't immediately notice, but it is actually very important and worth considering. Yesterday, the US Senate passed a resolution by a vote of 51 to 48 to block the tariffs on imports from Canada proposed by the Trump administration. 4 Republicans who voted with Democrats included Senators Rand Paul, who was a co-author of the resolution, Susan Collins, Mitch McConnell, and Lisa Murkowski. This move represents a rare instance of bipartisan opposition to Trump in the Senate, where Republicans typically hold significant influence. It occurred shortly after Trump criticized the vote, publicly urging Republicans to oppose it and vote against the measure. The impact of the Senate vote remains symbolic, as Republicans in the House of Representatives will not consider any action to block Trump's tariff policy. However, some Democrats in the House believe they have found a way to bypass Republicans on tariff issues. Congressman Greg Meeks of New York, who serves as the leading Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, announced that he plans to introduce a resolution to the House, which would compel a vote on the issue of tariffs, pushing the matter into the legislative spotlight. This procedural maneuver could be used to bypass Republicans and force a vote on the floor. Senator Tim Kaine also mentioned that he reached out to McConnell with a proposal to join the initiative, and McConnell, without hesitation, promised his support even before Kaine had to formally ask for it.
I said, I want to talk to you about my bill regarding Canadian tariffs. And you know, I didn't even get to ask the question, and he said, I'm with you. Kaine adds that he believes there are other Republicans, besides these four, who are thinking about it but haven't made up their minds yet.
Trump, of course, calls on Republicans to vote against this measure. In a post on his social media, he specifically highlighted four Republicans, Senators Paul, McConnell, Murkowski, and Collins, stating that they hope to finally join the Republican train and fight against the wild and outrageous Democrat assault. In short, the news that Republicans in the Senate are now ready to slow down Trump's policies already tells us something. But in the House of Representatives, Speaker Johnson will, of course, not let these intentions pass. And so it turns out that without jokes and laughter but with military humor, we continue to resist the enemy. We of course make memes, but don't forget that in addition to humor, our military also needs financial support. Therefore, like and comment under the video, and donate to the Channel 24 Fund. And we will see you in 24 hours in this very studio, the countdown of which has